Hello and welcome to Talking Books. I'm Joubert de Villiers. South Africa's controversial border war, which ended in 1990, is also referred to as the Angolan Bush War and the Namibian War of Independence. It was fought in Namibia and Angola. Many young white South African men were called up to fight. The war left many of them traumatized and psychologically scarred. One of these young men was Steve Joubert. As a South African Air Force pilot, he was not a national serviceman. His book, Gunship over Angola, the story of a maverick pilot, looks back at his experiences more than 35 years ago. Steve, thanks for joining me. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Jill.
So you wanted to be a pilot. That was the dream from your childhood.
Yep.
And why you joined the Air Force. Tell me a little bit about why that happened.
I grew up in a very military area. We moved down from what was then Northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, when I was but 5 years old. And after I got over the, I think I said in the book as well, after I got over the desire of wanting to be the chap who sold the ice creams in the neighborhood, I wanted to be a pilot. And there were aircraft around us all the time. Swartkops Air Force Base in those days was a very well utilized base with helicopters and transport aircraft and even some jets there. I think Sabres were based there at one stage as well. So I grew up with it around me, and I never knew anything else. I didn't want to be anything else.
Yeah. So the Air Force was your choice because you couldn't get a private, you couldn't get a commercial pilot's license. You didn't have the money to do that.
Yeah, my folks were very moderate means, and it was going to university or going into the flying side, and university was not an option for me at all. It never had been. And flying, even in those days, was a very, very expensive thing to get yourself the hours and the necessary qualifications to be able to fly commercially. And myself, as with many, many young chaps of that age, this was the route to do it.
Yeah. So you didn't necessarily want to be a soldier or fight in a war, you just wanted to fly.
I want to fly aeroplanes. No. The war was just, it was a necessary step, I suppose, was in joining the Air Force. You had to, it was part of the price that you paid.
So tell me about your training. You started off at Donata learning to fly Harvards.
Yep.
And the Harvard, you say, is your favorite plane still? Or?
Just absolutely wonderful aeroplane. And really taught, the chaps who flew it, really taught us how to fly them, or how to fly aeroplanes. It's not a gentle little creature near the ground, particularly. Trying to land it is quite a thing. But yeah, it was a wonderful aircraft, taught us many of the quirks of flying. And I think many of the chaps who trained on them today, airline pilots all over the world, still think back very, very fondly on the aircraft.
And it's great for aerobatics. And did you enjoy aerobatics?
Look, the aircraft that are far more designed for aerobatics than the Harvard, but the Harvard, again, in teaching you aerobatics, you had to do it right, otherwise it would bite you terribly. I was, one day I was trying to do a stall turn, and that's when the aircraft goes down, you pull it up and it stops in the air, and you turn it over on the side and you come down. But if you get it wrong, the aircraft slides back on its tail. And I ended up in a very, very ugly type of spin. And I actually tried to get out the aircraft, but I panicked a little, and I loosened my harness, my seat harness, before I tried to open the canopy. So I was being thrown around this cockpit.
Wow.
And I was trying to get out the aircraft. And it, all on its own, being the Harvard, all on its own, it went, and it ended up flying quite gently, and I was able to regain control and fly. Yeah.
And then from the Harvards, you went on to the Impalas, and that you had quite an experience with the Impala.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think for the aircraft, or fortunately for me, is that after a few hours in the aircraft, I ended up blowing my eardrums and everything. I flew the thing with a bit of a cold, and I had some other sinus type of problem. Strangely enough, the Impala, I didn't like the confinement of sitting in an ejection seat. It's you strapped in extremely tight into it, and I've always had a little bit of claustrophobia, and so there was an element of discomfort, I suppose, in the aircraft. I'm sure I would have got used to, but I didn't get the chance to do that, blowing my eardrums and stuff. I was out of flying those things.
Your writing is very evocative, and your style is fantastic. You just draw people in. I really enjoyed reading the book. You paint the picture. That scene is painted so vividly with your senses and your feelings as that was happening, and you didn't know what was happening, and your instructor had to take over the controls to help you to land safely after that. So it's a beautiful piece of writing. Other pieces of writing that I also enjoyed very much, I guffawed, I laughed so much, is when you wrote about the sergeant major who came in at one place, and he wanted to put the rule down, lay down the rule of law to your pilots.
We were relatively seasoned chopper pilots, and we were staying in what we call terrapins in Ondangwa. They were prefabricated structures on little stilts, and it was a new base regimental sergeant major. And he decided that, you know, new broom sweep clean and all that kind of thing. And they generally the NCOs don't give officers instructions, but he was quite entitled to request an inspection of the officers' quarters. But we were flying a hell of a lot at that stage. We were out of the, you know, off base a lot. We were sometimes sleeping in little foxholes, you know, well on the other side inside Angola. And this was one of our very, very rare occasions when we were all back in camp, or back in Ondangwa, which was relative civilization, sleeping in our own beds. And this guy passed the message out that he was coming to carry out an inspection, but he did that in the pub the previous night. 9 o'clock in the pub in the previous night, not a good time to do that. And when he arrived at 7 in the morning, came to this crashing halt outside the door and shouted at the top of his voice, as only sergeant majors can do, top of his voice, "Hey, turn, shown!" He was dispatched.
So another piece of really excellent writing was when you were flying the Alouette during the war, and you came across a scene where people had been killed, and it was I think a landmine blast that had, and they were talking to you on the comms, saying to you, are they white people or are they black people? And you were saying, what the hell does it matter? They are our people.
Yep.
And they said, no, but tell us, because there are no white soldiers in the area. Yep. But they looked white to you.
Yep.
And you went down.
Yep. Yeah, still, to me, one of the most cowardly acts one human being can do to another is place bombs in shopping centres where innocent civilian people are, and the other is to place landmines in roads where people travel along. Doesn't matter whether they're soldiers or whatever, it's a cowardly act, it really is. And it's one of the most vivid and ghastly memories I have of the war. That particular incident was not the first, but in that particular incident, I don't think people know that a lot of the fighting up there was conducted by black troops, not just white guys. And they were our troops. I mean, there's no difference there was no difference even then for many of us between that. And I came upon that ghastly scene of these guys. They just detonated a landmine up there. You can see it from a long way away. And I came across this ghastly scene of these guys lying. They'd obviously not been strapped into the vehicle that they were in, and they'd been blown out and in what must have been a massive explosion, and they were writhing on the ground, and their clothes had been blown off them.
Their skin too.
Yep, and when this, I said we need Casevac helicopters to come in quickly. These guys need help, and this radio call, this chap in an army base close by said to me, "Are those white or black guys?" And I really couldn't understand what the hell did it mean. What significance was that? And I said, they white guys. He said, "Are you sure they're white guys?" And I said, finally I got quite exasperated. It's not a very nice thing to look at. And I said, "Of course they are. They're white guys." And then I descended a little bit, and then we looked and they were actually back troops. But the explosion had literally burnt their skins off.
Wow. Terrible.
So yeah, those are the kind of...
So the horror of war. People romanticize war so often, but the horror of it is very bad. And the young men who went to fight there on both sides, they were very young. And the psychological scars and the damage that the war leaves lasts for many, many years. So one of the reasons why you wrote this book was to come to terms with your own psychological scars and to help others.
The book is my story. You know, I don't claim to be the first in, the last out, the highest, the fastest. I don't claim any of that. It's just my story. And everybody that participated in that conflict have their own stories. Okay, and those stories need to be told. I think most of those guys are now reaching an age where we're starting to feel our own mortality. So we're starting to look back on our lives. And I've, since the launch of this book less than a month ago now, since the launch of this book, I've come across countless people around the country, as I've gone around the country, that are still suffering extreme forms of PTSD. I had a chap in Durban last week beg me, say, please help me. And I looked at him, he said, please help me. I can't carry on like this. You know, the suicide rate, I think, amongst veterans, and I'm not just talking SADF veterans, I'm talking the APLA guys. I'm talking those people that were in the townships and witnessed and even participated in the necklacing of people. This is massive and severe trauma. These stories need to be told, they need to come out. And there are networks now that have been put together to help these people. And I aim now, by using the book as my platform, I aim to participate in that, to gather people in and say, please tell your stories. You know, the trauma is trauma. And what was traumatic to me may not have been traumatic to somebody else, and what was traumatic to them is not necessarily massively traumatic to me. I was talking to a good friend of mine in Cape Town during this tour, and there's an incident in the book where he was a chopper pilot with me, and there's an incident where I mention his name, and he said to me, I have no recollection of the incident. Wow. His wife then turned, she was sitting over dinner, his wife then turned and said, yeah, because you've just blocked it out.
And you blocked it out psychologically, but also you were expected not to say a word to anyone. You were expected not to share your experiences at all.
We come out of a generation where cowboys don't cry. We keep all these stories to ourselves. If the one negative comment that I've come across about my book, most people, well, the vast majority of people seem to have really enjoyed it, or enjoyed the experience of it. I don't know that there are parts of it that you can enjoy too much. But the one negative comment was from somebody who said, oh, it was just, you know, this latest generation of people trying to make a quick buck.
Yeah.
I just want to say, it took 4.5 years to write the book.
Wow.
And anybody writes books in South Africa for money,
yeah.
you're not going to eat very well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Steve, thank you so much for coming in and chatting to us.
Jill, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And my guest today is Steve Joubert, and his book is Gunship over Angola, the story of a maverick pilot. And that was it for this edition of Talking Books. Thanks for watching.